counting the cost of Typhoon Kemi. Floodwaters are receding, but the death toll has climbed. As Taiwan's annual war games are disrupted for a second year in a row, concerns grow over the country's combat readiness. Israel's Netanyahu visits D.C., raising hopes of a ceasefire in Gaza. Plus, as the world's top athletes gather for the Olympics, we sit down with Taiwan's culture minister to find out how the country will be sharing its culture in Paris.
Hi, see you on TaiwanPlus.
A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Leslie Liao. We begin with the latest on Typhoon Kemi, which has left a trail of destruction across the country, with cleanup efforts now underway in many areas. Kemi has left 7 people dead, 1 missing, and nearly 800 injured. It's knocked out power to tens of thousands of households, though most of them are now back on the grid, according to the state power company, Taipower. While Kemi has now passed over the country, stay-at-home orders remain in place for much of the country's south, with schools and offices there shut for a 3rd day in a row. Torrential downpours continue in southern and central Taiwan, including Kaohsiung, from where Louise Watt joins us now. Louise, what are the conditions like there?
After Kaohsiung's worst flooding since the 1980s, the mood here is one of despondency. Now, the heavy rains have subsided and the waters are receding, but this city has taken quite a hit. And Kaohsiung was on the up, an industrial city looking to reinvent itself as a center of entertainment and technology to compete with Taiwan's more richer cities further north. But now, this city has been shaken by the typhoon. I've spent the day with people impacted by the flooding. Let's take a look. After spending hours waiting for his home to empty of water, father of 2, Chiu Guanzhong, is now cleaning up the last remnants of Typhoon Kemi. The storm brought this port city of Kaohsiung the worst flooding it's seen in 35 years.
昨天一早起来。 一开门就房子里面就淹到楼梯，就淹到2楼了，就整个也没办法下楼，就整个都是全部都是水，都坏了，全部家具都浮浮沉沉，就在水中。
Typhoon Kemi brought extreme levels of rainfall across Taiwan, leaving at least 7 people dead and hundreds injured. Kaohsiung on the southern coast has been particularly hard hit. It's seen more than 1.6 meters of rainfall within 3 days. 12 hours ago, this road in the center of town was flooded up to the knees. The water has since receded, but it's still around. An army truck is helping to pump out water from a car park belonging to this residential building. There are still 300 cars and 50 motorbikes stuck underground. Almost 24 hours after the worst hit, residents were still without power and needing help.
水太急，这样把那个闸门冲下来的啦，把那个闸门冲坏掉，哎，所以希望政府可以补助我们，来帮忙我们大家啦。
In a meeting with disaster response officials in Kaohsiung, Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te promised households compensation of $600 and vowed to improve infrastructure so the country can better cope with heavy rains in the future.
我们的治水应该是要总和性的治水，因地制宜，总和性的治水，让它能够发挥充分的功能，以因应未来的气候变迁。
Taiwan is used to tropical storms and typhoons, but this one has been particularly intense. Residents hope necessary changes will be made to drainage and other infrastructure so that next time a storm hits, their city will be spared from similar heartbreak. We heard there from President Lai saying that Taiwan will spend more on mitigating the risks from flooding. Well, ever since Typhoon Morakot in 2009, that was Taiwan's deadliest typhoon on record, Taiwan has been doing just that, spending more. And in fact, Kaohsiung itself has spent $13 million on mitigating the risks. And Kaohsiung's mayor, Chen Chi-mai, today said that the money spent on drainage is actually what has meant that the waters this time has led them to recede more quickly. It was simply that the city was overwhelmed by the fact that the rainfall that fell was the equivalent of the rainfall that fell in Taiwan's last two huge typhoons.
Thanks for that update, Louise. Stay safe out there. That was Louise Watt reporting live from Kaohsiung. Meanwhile, parts of Taiwan continue to see heavy rain in the wake of Typhoon Kemi. People in mountainous areas and those affected by flooding are only beginning to see the full extent of the damage. Tiffany Wong has more.
Wading through storm waters, people in southern Taiwan are sifting through the aftermath of Typhoon Kemi, which killed at least 7 people and brought flooding, landslides, and power outages affecting thousands of households around the country. In many of the worst affected areas, school and work have been stopped for a third day in a row as they focus on recovery, which looks to be a long journey ahead.
现在直接看过去就是1.8米，要进去就是要游泳。
各单股江全部人切面四四方方这样子，现在全部都满了。
In Taiwan's agricultural heartland, flooding caused major damage to farms.
大家知影嘉义关系企鹅啊的种地，那因为以这样的台风跟这样的一个这么强大的一个风速啊。 那实际上大概我们的鹅啊饼啊损失非常严重哈，所以我们初估这次嘉义县的农损应该会在3亿5千万以上。
The typhoon also damaged roads and even bridges, prompting officials to warn people out on the streets to be careful.
因为到目前为止啊，看起来还是有这个南部地区的很多那个县市政府仍然在1级警戒处理有关。 虽然台风慢慢远离，但是强大的这个豪雨还是在哈，所以可能我们还是要保持警戒。
Several cargo ships near Taiwan's southern coast were also caught in the typhoon, which was downgraded to a tropical storm after ripping through the country. 5 of the vessels were grounded safely, but the search is still on for 4 Burmese crew members missing after their ship sank. As heavy rains continue to pelt the country, damage from the deadly typhoon may still worsen as the country anticipates more summer storms heading this way. Chris Ma and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Focusing now on Kemi's effect outside of Taiwan, the storm made landfall in China, forcing nearly 250,000 people to be evacuated from their homes on the east coast. The storm hit coastal Fujian province on Thursday night and is expected to bring heavy rainfall across much of eastern China as it moves inland. Top government officials have been discussing flood prevention and disaster relief efforts. More than 5,000 rescuers are on standby across the region. Kemi is the biggest typhoon to hit China so far this year. Kemi forced Taiwan to cancel part of its largest military drills for the 2nd year in a row. This year, the exercises were supposed to focus on unscripted combat scenarios, but observers say they didn't see much difference. To find out more, our reporter Jaime Okan spoke to Michael Hunziker, a former U.S. Marine who used to train soldiers here in Taiwan, now an associate professor at George Mason University.
You know, Hangguang, largest military exercise for Taiwan. Why are these drills specifically important for Taiwan's defense?
Well, I think there are 2 main reasons I would say these exercises are so important. The first is obviously it is an opportunity at the largest and highest levels of command for the military to rehearse and to practice these very complicated maneuvers, and so that's important in its own right. Second, it's an important signaling tool, sending a signal to the Taiwanese people that the military is prepared to defend them, sending a signal to Beijing that indeed they should not attempt an invasion. And of course, we can't ignore the fact it needs to send a signal to Washington that improvements are being made to the military and that Taiwan's military is worth investing in.
And this year was supposed to be the first time that these drills were unscripted, focusing on decentralization. Can you explain what that change is, why it's significant, and even maybe the decision, the motivation for that decision making?
So as best I understand, the decision was made because there has been a lot of pressure from analysts in the United States, but also in Taiwan, that the military is too hierarchical, it's too centralized, which means that the decisions are all made at the top and that the people at the bottom, the captains, the lieutenants, the privates, they wait around for orders. And obviously this doesn't really reflect how modern warfare works, where sometimes you lose contact with higher up, sometimes your higher command doesn't know what's going on, and so you need to allow frontline officers and leaders to make their own decisions. With that in mind, though, I have to say I'm a little bit skeptical, because a major exercise like Hanguang is not necessarily the best place to try to introduce this bottom-up way of making decisions. The simple fact is this exercise is so large, and it involves so much interaction with civil authorities and the cities and the municipalities that planning started months, probably even years ago. And so for the administration at the very last minute to say, we're going to go unscripted, simply isn't going to happen. That's just not the way these things actually work.
Do you think Taiwan should maybe get used to the fact that because it's in an area that sees so many typhoons and earthquakes, that maybe conducting a drill during these conditions?
Certainly there is a risk-benefit calculus that the highest levels of military and political leadership have to make. And I can understand the need to say this typhoon is large enough and threatening enough, we need to pause. But I would agree with you. Pause, I think, should be the operative word. Because if you really want to show that you have an organization that can adapt on the fly to an unforeseen circumstance like an enemy attack, like showing China and Washington the ability to say, you know what, this thing, we spent a year planning for it, a typhoon came, but we will adapt, we will pause, and we will start again, or we'll recock and do it again in September or in October. I think that would send a very powerful message that the Taiwanese military gets what we mean by flexibility and adaptability and pushing leadership down to lower levels.
That was Michael Hunziker, a former U.S. Marine and now associate professor at George Mason University. Japan says it plans to build a new missile test range on one of its Pacific islands as soon as 2026. Minami Torishima will be Japan's first test site for surface attack missiles with ranges exceeding 100 kilometers. The island, located over 1,800 kilometers from Tokyo, was chosen for its remoteness. Few ships pass through the area, and the island does not have a permanent population, only military and meteorological personnel. Currently, Japan conducts most of its long-range missile testing in the United States and Australia. Top Japanese military officials say the new test site would improve its missile operations. High-speed railways in France have been attacked by vandals just hours before the start of the Paris Olympics. France's state railway company says arsonists timed their attacks to disrupt travel just before the opening ceremony. 3 major high-speed routes are now paralyzed after signals along the tracks were set on fire and cables were cut. Thousands of people are traveling through France for the Olympic Games. The European Union's top diplomat has condemned Russia's war in Ukraine at a regional meeting in Southeast Asia.
I am aware that the Russian aggression against Ukraine may seem far away from Asia, but its consequences, be it in inflation or the increase in food and oil prices, are also felt by our populations.
Speaking at an ASEAN post-ministerial conference in Laos, Joseph Borrell vowed to work closely with the organization to defend multilateralism and international law. ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is a regional intergovernmental organization that promotes economic and security cooperation among its members. The group is hosting top diplomats from Russia, Japan, South Korea, the EU, India, and Laos ahead of the East Asia Summit and ASEAN Regional Forum scheduled for the weekend. U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington. The American leaders say there is a ceasefire deal on the table. Joyce Tseng has more.
A monumental week for U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris after being thrust into the race for the White House in President Joe Biden's place. She capped it off by meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where she took a firmer tone than Biden, expressing serious concern about the scale of human suffering in Gaza.
We cannot look away in the face of these tragedies. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering and I will not be silent.
Harris says it's thanks to President Biden's leadership that there is a deal on the table for a ceasefire and hostage release, and she called on Netanyahu to get it done. This comes after the Israeli Prime Minister's fiery speech to U.S. Congress, where he provided few details of such a deal. Israel has been waging a war against Hamas in Gaza after the militant group raided Israel in October last year. Over 39,000 people have been killed and over 1 million displaced in the enclave. The resulting humanitarian crisis has raised widespread international concern and caused divisions in Biden's own Democratic Party. With less than 6 months left in his term, Biden met with the Israeli leader in the Oval Office, the first time in person since he flew to Israel in a show of support days after the Hamas attack.
Well, welcome back, Mr. Prime Minister. We got a lot to talk about.
Relations between the two nations have strained over Israel's military campaign. But the White House says they are closer now than ever to closing a 3-phase deal that would free the over 100 remaining hostages in Gaza and ensure, quote, a full and complete ceasefire. This hope was echoed by families of American hostages who met with Biden and Netanyahu in Washington.
We got absolute commitment from the Biden administration and from Prime Minister Netanyahu that they understand the urgency of this moment now, to waste no time and to complete this deal as it currently stands.
Outside the White House, pro-Palestinian protesters performed what they called a blood dump, pouring gallons of red-colored water on the street, angry at the scale of bloodshed in the ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, at home, growing backlash for Netanyahu as well, with protesters calling on him to bring back their loved ones and end the fighting once and for all. Klein Wang and Joyce Sin for TaiwanPlus.
We're going to cut to a quick break, but stick with us here on TaiwanPlus News because coming up, a leader's legacy, a look at Vietnam's Communist Party head and his impact on the country.
Enjoy the rich diversity of Taiwan's independent music. Taiwan Calling, every Sunday, 9:30 p.m. on TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, like Thailand's capital, please follow us on social media.
过人生的话，你发现说，我们大部分都是爱美的。
我自己少遇见一朵花，我可能就不是这个样子。
开始思考什么叫做一个本土性，
大声的唱出来说我是台湾人。
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. A top economic think tank has raised its prediction for Taiwan's 2024 economic growth. The Taiwan Institute of Economic Research, or TIER, has revised its GDP forecast from 3.29% to 3.85% growth for 2024. TIER says reasons for its latest forecast include the global AI boom, a stable employment market, wage increases, and a booming stock market. It expects steady growth over the next few months, but says inflation needs to be monitored. 3 years of economic decline in North Korea may be over. Estimates from South Korea's central bank say North Korea's GDP likely grew by 3.1% in 2023. China accounted for over 98% of the North's total trade volume, helped by an easing of COVID-19 restrictions. In addition, Pyongyang's improved relations and arms trade with Moscow made a significant contribution to the recovery. At least one person is dead and 3 are missing after heavy rain battered northern Japan. Rivers overflowed, submerging farmlands and destroying bridges in the country's northeastern prefectures of Akita and Yamagata. The weather agency has issued the highest level alert after seeing record high rainfall in the region. Some 75,000 people were forced to evacuate. A 2-day state funeral for Vietnam's late leader Nguyen Phu Trong has concluded. As head of the country's ruling Communist Party from 2011 until his death, Trong expanded both the nation's economy and his party's grip on power. He left no clear successor. To learn more about Trong's legacy and what comes next, reporter Chris Gorn spoke with Nguyen Quoc Giang, a Vietnamese political researcher based in Singapore.
What has been the significance of Trong's period of rule?
Well, I think it's very important to note the context of Trong's rise in Vietnamese politics. What he has been doing until his death was trying to strengthen the party rule, especially by rooting out corruption within the party. And secondly, I think it's very important to note that despite the fact that he's kind of like a strongman leader like Xi Jinping in China, he didn't really intervene into foreign policy or economic policy. It also achieved great successes, especially in balancing the great power rivalry between China and US, and also extending Vietnam free trade agreements with a lot of countries. So I think there is kind of like a mixed legacy during Trump's rule.
What about other areas such as political rights, freedom of expression? What is Trong's legacy in those areas?
In the past 10 years under his rule, I think Vietnam has becoming, kind of like more China-like environment in terms of media and, civil society control, where actually we have less press freedom and less freedom on the internet. Although Vietnam, we have more crackdown on activities which were considered as like safe area, like environmentalism and labor rights movement.
What's been your sense of the reaction among everyday people in Vietnam to his death?
I think Nguyen Phu Trong was a really popular politician in Vietnam, not least because he was seen as a very clean and very dedicated politician. So if you come to Vietnam at the moment, or you just go around the social media in Vietnam, there is an outpouring of grief over his death. And for now, I think nearly 100,000 people came to Hanoi or came to Ho Chi Minh City to attend the funeral and to show their respect to Nguyen Phu Trong. There is also the concern among the population in Vietnam. They worry that the next generation of leadership would not, stand up to the standard of Nguyen Phu Trong, would not be as clean as Nguyen Phu Trong.
Well, on that point, from your point of view, what do you see as being the next steps for the Communist Party in Vietnam?
I think it's very important that Nguyen Phu Trong passed away midterm, so he didn't really have a really strong plan for succession, which is very important because, as you know, in one-party regime like Vietnam, succession plays a really important role in upholding the resilience and the stability of the regime. Which I think would be a very uncertain period in Vietnamese politics where internal infighting might continue. But I think more to come because it's very important to note that it's still very new. And for the past week, the leadership in Vietnam only focused totally on the funeral of Nguyen Phu Trong. And so after this week, they might have to think about the new leadership transition, how to negotiate the balance of power among different factions. And I think that's very important for the future of Vietnam because they will define what Vietnam will look like in the next decade.
That was Vietnamese political researcher Nguyen Quoc Giang. The Paris Cultural Olympiad is about to begin with over 120 performance artists from Taiwan showing off their talents on the world stage. Our reporter Sandy Chi got an exclusive interview with Taiwan's Culture Minister Li Yuan on their preparations and expectations.
Can you explain in your own words, what is the Cultural Olympiad?
文化奥运就是
选择一个固定的场域，邀请几个大概有10来个国家，在那边各自展现自己的文化内容。台湾很希望透过文化去展现一些跟各国的交流，所以这样的机会对我们来讲是非常需要想要去表现的，所以我们尽全力去表现。
Among all the countries participating in the Cultural Olympiad, what makes Taiwan unique and different?
百变台湾是一个不错的形容词，因为台湾为什么会百变，就是在历史的中间，我们遇到了非常多不同的文明的撞击，我们必须为了求生存，我们的民间的生命力很强，就发展出很多新的样貌的文化。
Well, we understand that there is always a China factor when it comes to international events. So for this time, the Cultural Olympiads, did our country do any preparations for it?
我们这次文化奥运在正式开始之前，我们有很多暖身活动。那个暖身活动就非常明显的已经那个标示台湾，甚至有出现国旗等等。欧洲人在看台湾的时候，已经不再像过去这么会受到中国的牵制，让欧洲人认识台湾。除了他们想象中台湾的是这种半导体啊，或者是医疗科技，让他们看到很软的实力，就是台湾的艺术呈现，不再是他们传统想象中他能够想象的台湾过去的那种跟不同文化连接的台湾的一切的比较没有约束的、比较自由的表演，而且比较大胆的一种走在某些思潮的最前面那种东西。
That was Taiwan's Culture Minister Li Yuan on the upcoming Paris Cultural Olympiad. And we'd like to thank you for watching Taiwan Plus News. You can visit the Taiwan Plus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, we take you to Santorini in Greece to watch the sunset. I'm Leslie Liao. Take care and see you next time.